All right, we are live. 1 p.m. Welcome. Happy Wednesday. We are going to dive in all things contractors. First and foremost, streaming this into the Facebook group. If you're there watching live, like I often do, inviting you to come into the Zoom. The team should have dropped the link in the comments below the post where you're seeing this. So if you're here live, take advantage of being here live. Come into the Zoom, join us on the chat. Help shape the dialogue, engage, ask questions. You won't be able to do that over on Facebook, or at least if you do that, there's going to be a delay. And so, excuse me, I'm just making sure we have the chat open, and it looks like we do. So if you can hear and see me, drop a comment in the chat. Let me know you're here. Let me know where you're checking in from. If you've been here before, let me know as well. I do see a lot of names on these weekly live streams, and trying to see who's showing up and how frequently. And we're here to serve you guys. And the more often we see you and we get to hear from you, it shapes the dialogue and it shapes the curriculum for these lives. So what we're doing today is a direct result of the questions you've been asking over the last couple of weeks. So excited to have you guys here. First timers, second timers, 10th timers. And yeah, I am going to be respectful of your time. We're going to jump in shortly. Going to look for engagement, drop the questions as we go, breaking up our talk today into three sections. And so I'll give you time to pop in and out with questions as we go through it. It's going to be very much interactive, like we often try and do when the topics are denser and it's more screen share driven. I know that's challenging, but with what we have going on today, I think it'll be super engaging. And as a bonus for those that hang till the end, I'll also be sharing a giveaway, a little bonus of a recording I did with my GC, because the topic today is managing contractors, right? The art of the managing projects and running projects with contractors. And so what better than the recording I did with my GC, who I've done dozens of projects with over the course of a couple of years. And he and I just peeling back the onion and talking about how to bring things in on time and on budget, right? So if you stick with me to the end, we'll get you that link. In the meantime, encouraging you to engage. Kelly, Ed, Kevin, Steve, I see you guys. Looks like we have Florida, Jersey, a bunch of folks checking in, and I'm going to jump right in. I'll be able to see the chat, and so continue to chime in there. And let me make sure my screen share is live, and you guys should be seeing a presentation in Canva. And I'll drive from this deck, but like I said, do my best to engage and field some questions as well. Ed, okay, I see a question before we even start. JV a deal and pay the accelerator class on a wholesale property. Think the answer to that is yes, but link up with Evan after this call and he'll be able to better help you with that. Guys, if I'm understanding that question correctly, anytime you guys are paying for education, coaching, consulting, right? Like that's continuing ed, that's consulting, that's something you build at your projects. So if you've got projects and you're netting these big fat spreads that you're going to get hammered on taxes, right? As a result of that, take the monies that you make on these projects, redeploy those monies into marketing to find the next deal, right? There's a lot of things you could do. Again, I'm not an accountant and I don't pretend to be one, but anything that you're doing to further your business, whether that's growing, marketing, learning, continuing ed, build that to these projects. If you're doing individual project LLCs, that's where you want to be building these things, assuming I understood the spirit of the question, Ed. If not, just like I said, link up with Evan after the call. He'll be able to better help you. All right, guys, let's jump in. And so, like I said, today we're going to be talking about managing contractors, managing the construction process, sourcing tradesmen, creating a draft, a scope of work for them to work off of, for you to work to, timeline, budget, right? And then how do you manage the project to ensure that you come in on time and on budget? And so before we jump in, I want to read this to you. And this is a post we've dropped probably 6 months or so ago and ruffled a lot of feathers, but I want you guys to hear it. I want to read it to you. Excuse me. A message from your contractor. As your contractor, I own you, your money, your returns, your profitability. I know you don't trust me, and frankly, you shouldn't. I'll cut corners and the quality will suffer, but you won't know until I'm long gone and the home inspector points it out. I'll give you a half-assed schedule and missed deadlines, but you don't know the difference anyway, so who cares? I'll do backdoor deals with my subs at your expense, but you get to deal with the mechanics lien, so that's your problem. Since you don't know what I know, you'll lose to me every time. But what if there was a way to avoid all this? How much would that be worth to you? Would you invest in a solution? If you're tired of being taken advantage of by your contractors, dig in, because we're about to pull back the curtain today. So let's hit it, guys. And yeah, that should ruffle some feathers, right? Hearing that should make you feel some kind of way. And the reality is that a lot of that is true. And if you're uncomfortable hearing that, don't worry. We're gonna unpack how to have this not be you. So we'll start with sourcing contractors. It's something I've been teaching on for a long time, and I want to just tell you guys, where not to find tradesmen is as important as where to find them. And everybody's default and everybody else who's out there teaching you how this works is going to tell you to go to Home Depot, go to Lowe's, write down the numbers on the side of the vans at 6 a.m. when the guys are loading material. And I'll tell you, that's the first place not to go, right? Like, I don't want to go to a place where tradesmen are running and gunning every day to get materials that they need for the day. I want to go to the place where the tradesmen are ordering materials delivered to the site so they could be effective and efficient. I want the tradesmen that know to call their sales rep at the lumber yard or at the plumbing supply and have all those materials either ready for pickup or ideally delivered to the site. Those are the kinds of tradesmen I'm looking to work with, and you should be looking to work with as well. And so we know now not to go find them at Home Depot or Lowe's. Where do we find them? We find them on referral from the inside sales reps at the lumberyard, at the plumbing supply, at the mason supply, right? Go there in person and say, hey, who are your top 2 or 3 preferred framers, right? At the lumberyard. Who's your go-to electrician at the electric supply, right? Who's your go-to mason at the masonry supply yard? Get the names of tradesmen that they're comfortable referring out. Don't go chasing trades that are running to Home Depot, right? That, like, right here, right? The kiss of death. I'm running to Home Depot. That's not the tradesman we want to build a business alongside. So be mindful of that. And then I want to quickly just break down the trades of tiers, right? We're defining here, right? We're setting the tone for what we're going to talk about today. So I want you to also understand that there's trades to tiermen, tiers to tradesmen, excuse me. And so you've heard it, good, fast, and cheap. You can get 2, but you can't get all 3. Well, kind of applies to the different tiers of tradesmen. Like a tier 1 tradesman, that's going to be the cheapest guy. He's going to work either solo or with his nephew. He's got a van magnet on the side of the van. He's likely using someone else's stamp, right? He's going to be uninsured most likely. So you'd be taking a lot of risk working with that tier 1 guy. The tier 2 guy is like slightly bigger team. Like, there's definitely some scale there. He's going to be good. He's going to likely have 2 or 3 trucks in the field. He's going to have a couple of licensed foremen and some helpers. He's going to have his own yard. He's going to stock some inventory. You won't have to deal with the running a Home Depot stuff that you might have to deal with the tier 1 tradesman, because the tier 2 tradesman is going to have inventory, right? He's going to have wire at the yard. He's going to have some of like the most often required, the 6-inch hi-hats, right? For the electrician. He's going to have a lot of those in stock. Not that you should be using those on your projects, by the way. And then the tier 3 tradesman, that's like bigger outfit. That's the guy that's going to be fast. He'll be good as well, but he definitely won't be cheap, right? He's going to have a ton of overhead. He's going to have a warehouse. He's going to have in-house accounts payable and receivable. He's going to have administrative staff. He's going to be licensed, bonded, insured. And so he's going to have to pass those costs through to you. So those are the tiers. So again, like, where do you go find them? Where do you not go find them? And then what tier of tradesmen do you need to be working with depending on the scope of your project? And then here are some ninja hacks on how to vet contractors. I'm going to go through these again. For the interest of time, I'll go in at a 30,000 foot level. We won't go too deep, and we won't talk about the exception so much as we will the rule. We'll try and focus on the rule and the things that are going to apply most frequently, because I think that's going to be of most service to most of you. And so again, vetting contractors, what are our tips, tricks, and things that we're mindful of? First and foremost, what do they look like? Like, what does their appearance look like? How do they appear when they show up? How do they appear online? How do they appear on social media? And ultimately, when they show up, a hack, something I love to look at is the truck, right? That truck's going to be very telling. If they're okay with driving around in a beat up truck, right? This thing's been banged into and it's all tore up, then that suggests to me that they're willing to let my job site look the same. Meanwhile, if their truck is meticulous and they care about how their tools are sorted and stacked, that's very telling, right? If they're going to do that and that's how they treat their truck and tools, that's how they're going to treat my job site. Another way to get more certainty around that is to find out what they're working on. So think current projects and previous work. A lot of times they'll tell you about everything that they've done, and they may or may not have those like on their phone, like previous work. I'd love to see photos of the things they've done on their phone, things that they're passionate about in their photo, in their camera roll. More so than that even, I'd like to see what they're working on right now. And I'd like them not to have a chance to prepare, right? Like, hey, what other projects are you working on in the area? Oh, can I get that address? And then is it okay if I swing by, right? Quickly, those questions in succession, and say, okay, so you're working on a project at 123 Main Street. Oh, is it cool if I swing by? Are the guys there now? Right? And then showing up and seeing what that job site looks like when they don't have time to prepare, when they don't know you're coming. That is huge, right? So be mindful of that. Again, one way to avoid having to do a lot of this is get referrals from A players. A players roll with A players. So if you're working with an A player mason, he's going to have an A player framer he likes to refer in right behind him. Your insulator, your drywaller, your trimmer, your painter, they all have a flow. They love working together. A players roll with A players. And so they're going to be able to refer you good quality tradesmen for the most part, right? They also don't want to refer you somebody that's going to come in behind them and make a mess of what they just did, right? And make their lives harder. So, and then another tell for us is how focused are they on the deposit? Like, is their sole focus on getting a 50% deposit, right? If so, run, right? They should be concerned with the scope of the project, the feasibility, design, procurement, right? Like thinking through the project at a really high level, not hitting you for a deposit and locking you up, right? Locking up the job. That's usually a sign that somebody's kind of like hitting and running. Like they'll want to take as many 50% deposits as possible for jobs that they have no business taking, and they just don't have the bandwidth to even complete. But, you know, because they're so cash strapped, they're looking for big chunk deposits. So that's usually another tell. So as we roll into the next section, I see a bunch of questions. So let me hop in, I'll field some questions, and we'll jump right back into the deck. Excuse me, as I hydrate. I get excited when I talk about this stuff. It's so a quite okay. Rashad, yeah, I knew that a message from your contractor would be triggering, right? And I knew that would definitely fire some of us up, because a lot of us have had those experiences. And if you haven't, you just probably haven't been doing this long enough. So kudos to you for your vulnerability and honesty, man. How do you know what the best suppliers to use? Chan, the best suppliers, like the biggest players typically are supplying all the projects in town. And so whatever your farm, whatever area you're farming, you can go on site, cruise around, check out what projects are happening, like what's happening on these project sites, and you'll see deliveries. You'll see, like in our area, it's either Hukin or Jager's delivering lumber. It's Hudson is delivering insulation and drywall. ABC is delivering roof and siding, right? And if you spend enough time in the field, you can kind of suss this out. And then whoever's delivering, those are the suppliers that you want to reach out to, that you want to go and source your contractors from, right? Because they're the biggest players. They're the ones that are shipping the most material. Maria, do we do we request RFPs from contractors? Well, once you've been doing this successfully long enough, you'll build a stable of tradesmen that you'll work with consistently, and the formality will no longer be required. Early on, when you're vetting a tradesman, yet I would say do an RFP, but don't use that term, right? Like contractors aren't, this isn't commercial work. This isn't government work. They're not used to bidding in competition with an RFP. What they are used to doing is building a relationship with someone that they want to do good work with. And so I would say an informal RFP request for a project with a new tradesman is not unheard of. But once you build a relationship with them, it's more about streamlining the process than it is about the formality. Do you offer bonuses or penalties? Great question, John. We'll get to that one. That's in the next section. Do you have them provide material, or do you? Again, great question. Both of those we're going to touch on in the next section. Do we have a page or a group for contractors? There's tons out there, but again, I'd be very careful. In Home Building Help, right? That's a Facebook group that's got something like 50,000 members in it, and they're all over the country. Everybody's referring in tradesmen, and it's the noise to signal ratio is a little out of whack. I'm wanting to understand what's going on in my farm. Get hyper targeted in your local market. Find the suppliers, find the best players in your market, partner with them. I'd be careful to cast too wide of a net. Charles, John's taking all your questions. Yeah, man. Those are solid questions. We're going to get to those. What are RFPs? Request for proposal? To answer that one. And yet, like, they are typically government work, infrastructure work, big commercial stuff. So you wouldn't necessarily see them on residential fix and flip. Can you give the contractor a small equity piece? Charles, that's a great question. And that's a different topic altogether. Go and watch last week's training. If you didn't already, we talked about that. And bringing a contractor in as an equity partner is a great idea, depending on who's going to be responsible for what. And if he's strong where you're weak, that's a great consideration. So I would just say that, but otherwise, we went way deeper on that on last week's training. So check that out. Reese, instead of an RFP, do you suggest telling the contractor the spec and what it will be paying? So I would say yes on the first. Like, I would definitely want to be able to tell him what I intend to do, like what the material schedule looks like, what we're trying to spec out for the house. I would avoid talking too much about the ARV because they also don't have a lot of clarity around what the after repair values are and what the market commands. That's not what they do. And so all that really does is just add a lot of confusion. And so we do houses that trade anywhere between like $1.5 to $2 million. Well, when you tell a GC or a framer or a plumber or whatever the case is, 1.5 million to 2 million, those numbers are kind of lost on them. It's not what they do. They are focused on their specific part of the process. And they also don't fully understand how their chunk of work plays into the entire scope of the project. That's been my experience. You may find one that does his own work, does his own spec builds, and then they might. And so you might want to have that dialogue with them, but otherwise I'd be very careful talking too much about numbers with tradesmen. Their own pay, not the ARV. So the framer, I'm paying $4 a foot. I understand. Yeah, we'll get to that too. That's kind of a piggyback on John's question about labor and material and how they bid, like per square foot. So I think I understand the question, but we'll get to that in the next section as well. Let me jump back in and I'll continue the screen share. Great questions, guys. These are good. We're going deep. This is part of why we do this exercise, right? Speaking of material schedules, here's a material schedule, but that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for this. Let me make sure you guys are seeing this because I've often jumped back into these chats, jumped out of the chat and back into the deck and not realized that I wasn't actually sharing my screen. So just let me know that you're seeing the screen again. Awesome. Thanks, Rachel. All right, let's talk about so now the scope of work, right? We've talked about the tradesman. where we're going to source them? How do we know that we're getting the right guys or girls? And now, how do we manage this scope? Timeline, material, and budget. I want to talk about it in 3 different phases. Again, I'm going to keep it high level. We can go down the rabbit hole on this stuff, but I want you guys to think about, from a timeline standpoint, the phases. Like we often talk about the trade tracker. If you've seen us share that here on these lives, it's those like chunks of trades that get a project done, and we progress, right, from mason, framer, exterior doors and windows into MEP, right, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, into insulation, drywall, floors, into trim, tile, paint, and you see a project happen, right? Same thing here, but let's think about the timeline at a 30,000 foot level. Like first and foremost, feasibility, like working with the contractor to understand, and that might mean inviting him to a walkthrough or doing your own video walkthrough and sending it to him, depending on like what kind of relationship you've got with your tradesman. And then having the contractor like verify that what you intend to do there can be done, right? A feasibility. Then we design the project. That's the actual scope. We build the scope. They can build it based on the conversation we had during the walkthrough, or you build it together. I think there's a ton of value in going through this exercise alongside your contractors the first time. Then permitting and procurement, like you've now handed the project over, you've awarded the work. Now, if you're not a licensed GC yourself, they're going to go and get the permits done, approved, stamped by the town, assuming this is a permit required job. At the same time, they ought to be thinking about procurement. They ought to be thinking about, hey, based on the design for the project, I know we're going to need to source these materials. They should be doing their takeoffs and creating a list of materials. That's happening while permitting is taking place with the town. That puts them in a position to jump right in and crush the timeline on construction, right? If all the pre-work is done, we've talked about this, right? It's a lot of it has to do with planning and communication. If the proper planning is done, it puts you in a position to succeed. It puts you in a position to crush the timeline on the construction. If you didn't properly plan, how can you expect to execute efficiently in the field? And then at the end, after the construction disposition, like the house is going to be sold. Ideally, the buyer is going to do a home inspection. Your contractor, your team is still on the hook to come and punch out the house, to do those little odds and ends, to do those things that you need to do to get it over the finish line, whether that's you identifying it during a walkthrough or an inspection checklist, a home inspector, whatever the case is, it's going back and punching out the house. So those are the 5 phases that apply to the timeline. And then from a material, and so again, this is one, I don't want to beat this one to death, but I want you to be aware of why this is important. Like if you've ever run projects and you haven't put time into the design, you haven't thought about procurement, you haven't developed a material schedule. How frustrating is it when your tradesman's on site needing something and you're getting inundated with texts and calls and having to run around to pick things up, right? And so if you've ever done a project with a contractor and didn't spend time on the front end, figuring out, like speccing the project out, doing the design, selecting the materials, putting them into a worksheet, right? And providing them to the contractor, you know the pain I'm talking about. And so we'll just take it one step further, right? Assuming you've done those things, you've done the pre-work on the front end, you and your contractor are on the same page, you know what materials you're going to use, you know what's going in, you've decided on the fixtures. The next step is sourcing and receiving the fixtures. It's who's going to be responsible for making sure that those things are ordered. And then one key element is unboxing and ensuring that everything is complete and not broken. Right? Like, so if you're going to source all the fixtures for the houses and it's going to be your responsibility, or you're going to have your admin do it, or you guys are going to have everything delivered to the project site, someone's got to be responsible for unboxing each item and ensuring it's complete and everything is in there. Because the only thing worse than having a contractor constantly calling you is having a contractor there ready to finish the house, installing, finding that things are missing, right? Like the box is there. You've sourced the fixture, but there's a missing part in or piece in the box, or not in the box, I should say. And so again, I put an asterisk there because that is something that's worth paying special attention to. Some people think that the process stops at design, stops after the material schedule has been created. But like sourcing is another step, and then unboxing, receiving, and checking for completedness of the item is the final step. And so that one's often forgotten. So again, just be conscious of that one. And I'm going to jump into one final stage, and I see a ton of questions coming in. So we'll jump back into those questions in a second. Excuse me. And so budget, ultimately, this is where the rubber meets the road. Are we on time? Are we on budget? Are we going to make money on this thing? I want you guys to be mindful of two things in particular is when you're talking, and we're looking at this through the lens of the contractor now, and specifically developing a scope. So the budget's been agreed to. We have $250,000 to do this addition and add a level. Now, ideally, we're going to be borrowing that money, right? Like, and unless you're independently wealthy or you've got a ton of liquidity, I wouldn't expect that you're going to have those monies ready to draw from on a whim. What you're likely going to need is to do draws. So how does that apply, and how does that impact your contractor? Well, ideally, like we said earlier, contractors want to see 50% deposits, right? They want to be working with your money. They want that big chunk of cash because they often lack liquidity. And so they're going to want those monies in hand. But the reality is you're going to be drawing against this big pot of money that a lender's put aside for you for the project. And so they might want a 50-50 kind of draw schedule, or what's most common is like 40 deposit, 40 at rough, 20 at finish, 40, 40, 20. What you'd want to argue for is 20, 20, 20, 20, 20, right? Like 20% payments throughout the course of the project. You're most protected that way. Your upfront deposit is smallest. And then each time at a milestone, you're releasing more monies that you're having to go then and get from the lender anyway. So this is how you can manage your budget to the timeline most efficiently. So again, I know that was a little bit dense. I want to just make sure they understand that like the 50-50 approach that most contractors will hit you with is not ideal for you. It's not ideal for your project. What is most ideal is the 20%, the 5 payment draw. And so what you'll likely wind up with is something in the middle there, but I want to at least share all of these with you. Another thing now to answer John's question from earlier regarding material purchases and bonuses and penalties. This is the other section about this I wanted to highlight for you guys. Like our accelerator in real time. We just came off a call last night talking about, well, what trades are expecting you to buy the material and what trades are buying their own materials, right? Like that is different in a lot of parts of the country, but for the most part, it's either going to be like a mason is going to bid you all in, a framer is going to bid you labor and material, right? Like, and so we're actually aggregating all this data and creating a list just like this because I want folks to know when they go out to get a bid, should they expect an all-in bid and the number is the number, or should they expect that like an insulator or a drywaller or a trimmer is going to charge just labor, and then they're going to do takeoffs for the material, and then they're going to order the material from their supplier, and they're going to ask you to pay for it. So again, this is just something to be mindful of. Like, am I getting an all-in bid? That's the question you want to be asking. And then finally, with regard to bonuses and penalties, are you going to reward the tradesman for coming in on time and on budget, or are you going to penalize them for going over? This is its own dialogue and discussion. So I'm not going to go too deep on it here. I'll just tell you that what we love to do is to incentivize and bonus tradesmen when they least expect it. We don't put it into a contract. What we do is if we win big on a project, they share in that, right? They're not equity partners. They're not on the JV, but they share in that win, in that we'll give them a bonus at closing. And at that point, they're not expecting it. And that's when gifting and bonusing is best received, is when it's unexpected. So putting it in a contract along with a penalty, in my opinion and experience, is not very fruitful, but celebrating the win together is. So again, like I said, that one is debatable and we could go on for hours on just that one, but that's how we do it. And hopefully that's helpful for those of you that are considering doing it. And then let me answer a couple of questions. And then we'll jump back into this final section. And let me just jump out of the screen share here. Make sure I didn't lose my spot. Chan, does the course go deeper on this topic together with providing sample contracts, plans, et cetera? Absolutely, man. All of the stuff that we're talking about today and the deeper dives, the worksheets, the things that we were just alluding to that we built on the call last night with Accelerator, all that stuff is in the Accelerator. It's in the course. So happened to me. I see a lot of happened to me. That sucks. Yep. I know the pain. Yep. Another question, who is the person unboxing and receiving? Separate staff on site? Contractors aren't willing to do that. Yeah, the contractors are definitely not willing to do that. And frankly, you don't want them to do that. That's best left to someone who's administratively sound, because that person has to receive the item, right? Like sourcing isn't just ordering the thing on Wayfair or Amazon or HomeDepot.com, right? That's only half sourcing. The other half of sourcing is receiving, unboxing, confirming that everything is there. If you do this with a partner, there's typically like an operations partner, and then there's an administrative or like financial partner. This would fall on the person who's operating behind the screen. It just makes more sense to have the things shipped there, unboxed in a safe setting, checked in, labeled, marked, closed back up. So depending on how your organization is structured, who that might be, it could be different. If you have multiple bids for one trade, make sure you level the bids apples to apples 100%. Part of, we aren't going to get into that today, but something that we do to ensure that that's the case is we do, and you guys have heard me talk about this in the past, we do a plan review checklist. And during the plan review process, we prepare the bid to ensure that it's apples to apples. And if we do field multiple bids from multiple tradesmen, we're telling them specifically what we want them to bid based on our plan review and based on our checklist, right? And so when we were talking about RFPs before, we don't have a formal RFP. We have an informal list, essentially. So that's a really good point, Tom. Rashad, can you speak to forced appreciation, cosmetic rehab? How would you determine ROI on improving items? Oh man, that's another topic and live training all in and of itself, man. And I'm happy to do that on another call. We've done that in the past on these calls. And so I'm sure there's a training that we can link you to for that, but happy to go deeper on that, but that's a completely different topic. Is the plan review we did on the new construction on the Accelerator call? Yeah, that's exactly right. That's how we queue up the bids to ensure that we're getting apples to apples, right? Like we want these bids to be comparable across the board. We don't want, if you've been in our Accelerator Facebook group, you'll recall one of our own sharing a trim bid for $211,000, right? Like clearly whoever was bidding that was not working from the same plan set, because that was a sub $20,000 project. And so if you remember the exchange, for those of you that are in Accelerator, like he responded with, do you mean 21,000? Like, or do you mean 211,000? And the contractor confirmed that he meant 211,000, right? So clearly he wasn't reading the same plan set, or he really didn't want the work. Tyler, let's say your GC orders the windows, lumber, countertops. Can you pay the supplier directly? Reason I ask is some GCs have discounts and they don't want you to know how much they pay for them. And so, yeah, this is exactly what we were talking about on last night's Accelerator call. Like, what trades should you expect to pay for the materials directly to the supplier versus what trades do you pay them directly and they pay their suppliers? And so it's different for each trade. We won't have time to go into it here, like trade by trade, but with your examples, I've always paid direct for those materials with the GC, for the lumber, for the windows, for the countertops, for the fabricator. Like I've always paid for those materials directly. So let me jump back in and then we'll answer the last few questions here. This is proving to be more material than I had anticipated. And so We may push a little bit past quarter to the hour like we normally do, but I want to make sure I get through the balance of the slides and all of your questions. And I know I'm speaking quick, and so I appreciate your guys' patience, and those of you that are following along. Remember, this will live on in perpetuity here in the group. Like for those that are in the Facebook, this Zoom is streamed there. So you can always go back, pause, rewatch a section, and all the Q&A is captured there as well. So with regard to your project manager and what's expected of them and making sure so this could be you, you could be self-managing your projects, or you could be hiring a GC to do that. Whatever the case is, you or he or she has to be responsible for LCA, leading, coaching, and holding accountable. That's their number one priority. Managing the project timeline and budget. That's obviously if the scope of work was prepared properly, they'll know what needs to happen in what order and how much money they have to execute on it. And so those are their two primary responsibilities. In the interest of time, I won't go deeper on that, but those two are critically important. Field practices. And so here's how you help them do that, or how you do that if this is your project and you're self-managing the project. Again, I'll focus on the two most important ones so I have time to get back to the questions. Daily stand-ups, daily, touch the project every day. Every project gets touched every day, no matter what. And we'll talk about this. It's so important that it's in this slide deck twice. And then weekly, let's make sure that we're doing our payables and that our tradesmen are being compensated for the work they've done at the end of each week. And so if you're on that 20 draw schedule, that means you're taking that big chunk, that 20% of the total budget. If it's $250,000, you're taking a $50,000 draw from your lender, you're dropping it into your checking account for the LLC. And then that 50 is going out over the course of 3 weeks to the tradesmen for the work that they've done. And two KPIs critically important to make sure you're staying on time and on budget is project percent completedness. You are 3 weeks into a 4-month-long project. You should be somewhere at 20-ish% complete. Are you, right? Every Monday you're reporting in on where you're at. Have you made progress is really what that's about. Are you in the same place this Monday as you were last Monday? If so, something's clearly broken, right? You need to be making progress, incremental progress each day, each week, and ultimately finishing the projects on time. And then are you passing inspections? If you're doing permitted work, you're going to have inspections. And then are you passing them, right? Nothing can kill a project or slow a project down, like failing an inspection and then having to wait a week or, God forbid, 2 weeks to have the inspector come back out. So I know I'm going quick. I want to just be conscious and respectful of everybody's time and make sure we get through the majority of the chunks and then get back to your questions. And then here, I won't belabor this too much. It doesn't much matter what tool you use, but use a tool, right? Ours is Slack. We've talked about Podio, Monday, Asana. And if you're doing bigger scale stuff at 10, 12 projects, scale, right? Builder, Trend, and Co-Construct are the tools for the next level. And then here, like I said, we're going to drive the point home. This was important enough that I put it in here twice. How do you drive the process? How do you ensure that the contractors are getting the things done on time? Daily stand-ups, daily project touches. Sometimes if the projects are close enough to your hub, which is why we advocate for farming a really tight, for having a really tight farm, is because you can touch those projects twice a day. First thing in the morning to ensure that the trades are there when they're supposed to be there. And then again, at the end of the day, to ensure that they cleaned up the site and that they did what they said they were going to do and that someone didn't just disappear at lunch. Weekly huddles, that's when you'll talk about the KPIs, the things we just, talked about, your project percent completedness. Are you passing inspections? If so, or if not, why not? Payables, we talked about that. It's critically important that you get the tradesmen paid so they can keep the machine moving, right? If you've ever had a tradesman chase you down on a Friday to get a check to pay his guys, you know how unpleasant that can be. And so encouraging you to put a payables process in place so that doesn't happen. And again, it's beyond the scope of this call, but we've got a process for that we teach inside of Accelerator. And then here's another one. This is how you get ahead. This is how you get ahead and stay ahead. Don't worry as much about trust, worry about the radar, right? Think 2 weeks ahead, and ideally you're thinking 4 weeks ahead. And where do I need to be by then? And who needs to know that the project is coming? Like, what tradesmen need to know that I'm about to hand them this project in 2 to 4 weeks? And you want to be talking to those tradesmen. You want to be inviting them to come by the project site, right? Like, you're in the process of getting the house sided and roofed. It's not a bad idea to already have reached out to, you better have reached out to your MEP, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. They've already got to have bids in. And you should, at that point, be thinking about insulation, drywall, and floors, that next chunk of trades, and already be reaching out to them, right? Just making sure that they know that you've got a project coming and that you're going to be looking for pricing, that you're going to be looking for them to bid it. And then I'll close the loop here and then I'll jump back into the questions. So 3 things to be mindful of when working with contractors is like, where do you find them and how do you ensure that they're good quality tradesmen, whether you're going the GC route or you're going the individual trades route. How do you create a scope of work, being conscious of the timeline, the budget, and the materials? And then how do you drive? Like, what's the meeting cadence? How are you doing this in the field with your contractors to ensure that you're coming in on time and on budget? And I know I hit that last part hard, but I want to make sure that I leave time for us to jump. My question to you, and then I'll answer your questions, is like, how do you dial in this like contractor sourcing and management process? If you have one now, which of these 3 sections can you focus on? I'm not asking you to do everything today, but what can you implement right away? Drop that in the chat. I'd like to hear from you guys now, those that have active projects, working with GCs, working with the tradesmen. What can you do right out of the gate to improve the project, improve the process? And if you don't, right, like, you're in a position now to start off on the right foot. If you don't have projects working, if you don't have existing relationships with tradesmen, you now have the blueprint, right? You have no excuse. The blueprint is here. Work from this blueprint. So that's my question to you guys. And now I'll jump back into your questions and you should be seeing my smiling face again. And we're getting close on time. I'm gonna do the best I can. I know I was a little long-winded today with our slide deck. Kelly, I would rather take longer than cut it short. I am in agreement, right? Like, I want the process, assuming you're not talking about this slide deck, but but I want to make sure that the guys do the job right, because if they don't do the job right, this applies to both things. If they don't do it right, you're paying for it later. You're going to have to redo the work later. So that's a great comment, assuming it applies to the talk we're having right now and working with your tradesmen. Cliff, how do you keep track of materials ordered, ensuring that they're not buying way more than expected? Contractors don't care and they overbuy because they don't have to worry about paying for it and they won't return it. So good tradesmen know how to do takeoffs. And if you don't know how to do a takeoff, asking them to show you the material list or the takeoff isn't going to be very fruitful. What I would suggest is that you're very involved and attentive the first time. Like, do everything alongside your tradesman the first time, so you know how long it should take and how much it should cost. So it doesn't hurt to shadow them when they do a takeoff, because you'll be learning as well. And then they'll know that there's a second set of eyes on them and they're not going to over order. Like, they'll anticipate an extra 10% for waste. That's expected. If they're factoring in 20%, that's lazy, right? Depending on the type of material. But these are the kinds of things that you'll learn from doing it alongside them, right? Just over their shoulder the first time. That's provided me a lot of clarity, gives me the confidence I need to like pay the supplier directly for the material, knowing that the contractor ordered the right amount. Reese, how many flips? How many flips warrant builder trend, co-construct? 10 to 12. That's been my experience. It's actually billed based on starts. They call it housing starts. So how many projects do you intend to start in a given period? That's how they factor in how much you can pay. And so, like, if you're a big business and you're doing a ton of these, you could expect to pay $1,000 a month for a builder trend or something like that. But for most of us on this call, you can do most of what needs to be done using Slack or Podio or Monday or Asana. In Slack, do you have one channel per project? And how do you organize it? Yeah, exactly right. One channel per project. All communications regarding that project happen in that silo. Everything stays siloed. You don't talk about ordering the front door on 123 Main Street for on the Slack channel for 345 Main Street. And that's been the problem in the past, is like everything's done via text and email and cell phone. And it's a disaster. And that's what Slack is. That's what Slack was created for, siloing communication. Another advocate for Slack. Yep. Tom, 2-week look aheads, 4-week look aheads. Awesome. Email them the subs, make sure they get a response. Sometimes we'll do sub meetings every 2 weeks, preferably live on site. Nailed it, man. That's exactly how I advocate for doing it. John, everybody shouting Tom out because he nailed that one. Do we still use Flipper Force? Yes, Flipper Force is our front end tool. It's how we do all of our modeling, and it's how we prepare our scopes. Once we're in the field executing, we transition over to Slack. We won't use Flipper Force for in progress project management. We'll use Slack, and we'll use QuickBooks for the financials, because everything is drawing from that one account. And so it's easy to run reports in QuickBooks and then drop those into Slack so the team can work from those if needed. And one more question from Facebook. Based on the current market trends, how are we positioning ourselves going forward? Oh man, that's another training too. What I'll say to that, from Dave. Hey, Dave, it's a good question. So what have we found, right? I'll close with this because this is important. I think a lot of folks will paralyze themselves worrying about where the market is going. Like there's such thing as like worrying or like being responsible and having data and making decisions. It's another thing to be crippled and paralyzed and not do anything. And so what we've found is like, we'll often lean in, right? We're going to keep doing deals in the markets where we know it's safe to do deals in. And we're also going to make sure we're buying right. Like we want to make sure we're buying right. We want to make sure there's demand for the finished product. If you're seeing like saturation and you're seeing like tons of days on market, like clearly that's not a place you want to be creating new inventory. But if you're building where we are and where a lot of our students are, in towns where there's 5 to 15 listings active, like going forward, you're good, right? You're good. There just isn't any inventory. And so anything refreshed, anything new is flying in markets like that. And that's, you know, that's a testament to knowing your market, knowing your farm, and being hyper targeted on the areas that you want to actively invest in. So again, like just be conscious of like the market in general. Yeah. Understanding where things are going, but then be hyper focused, right? And if you're trying to do fix and flips out of state in 4 different markets, you're going to get your face ripped off. Like that's just the reality of it. But if you can be hyper focused and hyper targeted in an area that you are familiar and confident, then I'm not too worried about the market. I'm worried about just crushing in our farm. And one last question, is Slack just for internal communications? Contractors are in there? No, I do not invite tradesmen in there. I'll invite our GC, our project manager, and our internal team. Contractors will just make a mess of your Slack channel. Frankly, again, think about signal to noise ratio. Like you want all signal. Contractors will invite a lot of noise. Like what's important to your electrician will not be important to your drywaller. And if that's all happening in a Slack channel, everyone's going to get disengaged. So, oh, one final question. Oh man, I almost forgot the bonus. All right, quickly. We're at time, but here it is, guys. For those that have hung out the whole time, we're giving you, bear with me, access to. So this was our in-person event in keeping with the theme of contractors, managing contractors, coming in on time, coming in on budget. We did a project management fireside with our project manager. This was a killer session at our in-person a month or 2 ago now. And so I'll just quickly scroll past it. Here's he and I jamming.
Not just my knowledge.
And I want to make this available to you guys. If you weren't there, this was a $2,000 event, right? And so if you didn't make the event, you wouldn't have seen this. If you were at the event, you know how sick this was. This is incredible. And so I want to make this link available to you. And so Evan's got it, and the team's in the chat now. So if you're here now, comment and we'll get this link over to you. And if you're watching this later in the replay, comment training in the comment section, and we'll go back in and we'll make sure we get this over to you guys. So, oh man, thank you. Whoever reminded me, I almost forgot about the bonus. Awesome. Oh, training. I see it, guys. Okay, we'll make sure we get these over to you guys. That talk with Marcos, our project manager, was incredible. And he and I have done dozens of deals together. And so we've built a really cohesive process that you guys now get visibility into. So you've seen it taught at a 30,000 foot level, and now you're going to hear it discussed for 45 minutes at a very tactical level and how he and I execute it inside of our business. So excited to get that over to you guys. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in. For those that stayed the whole time, happy to get you over this link. And I'll see you guys next week on the next live training.